Welcome to the CTO2CTO podcast, where Chief Technology Officers dig into the challenges and opportunities that leaders face every day at the intersection of business and innovation. I'm your host, Lucas Hendricks, CTO at Forte Group. Welcome to the CTO2CTO podcast. I'm your host, Lucas Hendricks, CTO of Forte Group. And here with me today is Robert Stewart. He is the CTO at Arbital Health. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me here, Lucas. It's great to spend time with you.
So maybe if you could just explain, like to a 12-year-old, what is Arbital Health and how does it work?
Sure. So Arbital Health is a health tech startup. We recently founded just about 2 years ago, almost exactly. And at the core, what we're trying to do is make value-based care easier to administer and to become successful, even more successful. It's in the United States. There's a lot of challenges in the healthcare system. One of the big challenges is how does healthcare get paid for, and how do you set incentives? I'll probably talk a lot more about it, but this model, value-based care, is based on outcomes, and there are challenges around how do you measure outcomes, and in healthcare finance and finance in general, there's a lot of complicated actuarial aspects of it. So what we did is we acquired a value-based care actuarial firm called Santa Barbara Actuaries with some just absolutely amazing healthcare actuaries. And then this was Travis May and Brian Overstreet founded the company with the view that there's some opportunity because of data fragmentation to better enable, how the healthcare gets paid for, and he's done that in a bunch of different areas. And so what we are doing is building a platform around the actuaries and to scale up what they do. So then we sit kind of between the payers for the healthcare, typically health insurance plans, and then providers or companies that enable providers, healthcare providers, physicians, and we help with the negotiations, but specifically the reconciliation of the contracts and kind of and thus Arbital, the arbitration, the adjudication of the value-based care contracts.
So you're in a sense connecting to both payers and providers through a platform.
Yes, exactly. So we build a platform, modern platform. Of course, I have to say AI powered, but it is, and that's really key elements to it. And there are lots of opportunities. It makes a lot of sense for us. But it's a platform to ingest all the data, clean the data, reconcile it against the actual contracts, which have a lot of complicated actuarial concepts in them, and then render that data and visualizations that anyone who participates in this can understand.
And then where does the value-based part of this come into it? So what you're describing would be, I assume, for any kind of payer-provider connection, but there's this value-based component.
Yeah. Great question. So the traditional way that healthcare gets paid for in the U.S. has been and arguably still is today is what's called fee for service, where providers get paid a fee for providing a service, and so it's in some ways it's a simple way to administer. Theoretically, it's a simple way to administer. You come up with a bunch of codes, and so there are these procedure codes. So, for example, a follow-up office visit with your primary care provider, that's a 99213 if it's moderate complexity. So there are codes for everything, but to get reimbursed, there has to be a code for it. So there are a lot of things that providers can do that don't have codes, like responding, or has been anyway, like responding to an email. If there's no code for it, they can't get reimbursed, despite the fact that it could be very helpful. So that's kind of the traditional way. And then value-based care is where the provider gets compensated not for just a volume of activities, but the actual outcome of those activities. But which is great, and it makes a lot of sense. I'm a total believer in it, and have been for a while. But Where a challenge comes in is how do you measure those outcomes? And that applies to a lot of things. Like that comes up with engineering too. Like how do you measure outcome of, I always get questions of how do you measure the productivity of engineers and the outcome. It's challenging to do. And so there's some additional administrative burden. And so that's what we're trying to do is make it easier for VBC to succeed by taking away that admin burden from the providers. And
so reducing the friction, essentially, the operational friction.
Exactly.
Great. Now, one thing that we discussed briefly before the podcast is how you're using AI in particular. And just, one challenge that I think, and this could be, any kind of digital solution, but particularly with AI, AI to be effective relies on subject matter expertise, whether it's a trained model or an actual expert who's training the model. So how do you marry up the technology in this case with something like actuaries and actuarial science, and which is maybe to the uninformed kind of a dark art? It's extremely dense, a lot of math, very complex math. So maybe if you could tell that story a bit.
Sure. So one of the initial way that we're using AI is there's a feature that we have called Merlin AI, and it's essentially chat with your data, and it's a very, very powerful feature. There are a lot of people who are involved in care, like especially clinicians, but medical economists that maybe don't know SQL. And I would personally rather my provider focus more on the clinical side than on understanding how to interact with data from, like writing code. But it enables that. And so through natural language, you can ask questions about the data and then even more powerful, then get visualizations. So building the visualizations, we're able to do that. And so rather than creating lots of one-off reports and things like that, you can use AI to interact with it. And that saves a ton of time. That works though only if, of course, the data is well structured and the context is well communicated to the AI. And so we spend a lot of time, and this is with our subject matter experts, with the actuaries, understanding what needs to be communicated. Well, first of all, how does data needs to be structured, but then also how do these VBC contract provisions and just there is a lot of information about value-based care and contracting on the internet, but it's not the most popular topic on the internet. There's not as much information, and also it's
kind of surprising.
Yeah, but maybe more so the actual contracts. So the provisions of the contracts, those are not, that's not public information.
Right.
So we take a very common sort of RAG architecture approach to it of indexing all that information and then injecting it into the prompt as part of their interaction with it.
So that's how you're bringing the technology to your subject matter experts, essentially, as opposed to the other way around, where you might have to train engineers to understand the actuarial side of things.
Right. And so we've created this position, this role that I don't know if it exists out there anywhere else, but an actuarial engineer. And so in some cases, like the subject matter expert that, there are a lot of platforms out there that are very subject matter expert heavy. In our case, it's actuarial science, is it? And is the subject matter. And a lot of actuaries, they do write code, but is often the case more, scripting, analysis, not like full-on platforms and full software engineering, but it's a good step toward it. And so what we thought is, these are entire degree programs, and they're very hard exams and many exams that our actuaries take to become credentialed. Trying to get a data engineer to do that, okay, that's a lot of work. We just thought, okay, maybe it's easier to go the opposite direction. Can we get our actuaries to the point that they can write code? At least some of them, some of the analysts. And we've been super successful with that. And we're continuing to grow that team. And what's made it possible, I think, is AI. So a lot of AI coding tools. So a lot of the extra work that it would take to build up that, at least the basic knowledge of like how do you write a lot of this code, and we even have like actuaries doing front end code as well, like the whole end to end programming, and it's been surprisingly successful.
Is that code that ultimately gets committed into a production platform?
Yes, so
Wow.
that's like part of the production platform, and so it definitely, of course, it takes more oversight from software engineers, but the actuaries who made that transformation into those roles have been really successful at it.
Yeah. That I think that is something that we're starting to see probably in a lot of other companies, where the product function, which starts with some sort of subject matter expertise around a specific problem to be solved, enabling that role to actually start, writing code and ultimately, building out the platform. But there's guardrails, right? And there's always a last mile problem. So tell me a bit about what guardrails do you use so that you're not creating, a vibe code explosion of, a friend of mine was saying he had to review a 1,000-line commit that was purely AI generated, and it took him 2 weeks to do so.
Yeah. It's so they are paired up with people with traditional software engineering training, and the leader of that team also very deep experience in software engineering. And there's also, we will use kind of I don't know, like LLM as a judge, like other AI coding expert as a judge. So having AI reviewing that code as well, which that helps. But there is definitely there are humans involved in reviewing it. So another engineer reviewing the code that they write, and a lot of automated tests as well.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about your origin story. So you have a background in physics. What kind of physics in particular did you do, or do you still do?
I don't really do too much. Do some reading still, but I got my degree in physics and philosophy at Rice University, and my focus was on nuclear physics, and then transitioned to space physics, but it was more on the experimental physics side, and it was super useful. I then moved on to, like, after graduating from Rice, moving to Austin, working in a research lab, doing underwater acoustics, designing sonars for submarines.
Wow.
So it's back then, if you had a physics degree, the joke was like your bachelor's degree in physics qualifies you for one thing, to get a master's degree in physics, which qualifies you to get a PhD. There weren't quite as many job opportunities outside of it, but that was an amazing opportunity, and I got to learn to write a lot of code there.
Interesting. So what were you coding in at that time?
So the assembly language was part of it, because these had there's a real-time embedded system as Vertex 32, if I remember correctly. So because these systems had to go on a submarine, and they're going to go underwater for a long time, they had to be very reliable, very performant. So C, 486 assembler, and my favorite language at that time, certainly, and maybe still is there's a language called Occam, and it was for these NMOS transputers, which were these chips, and they were designed implicitly for parallel programming that we use for doing a lot of the image processing. So we're getting signals from the transducers that are on the sonar. They're like pinging out into the water to the ocean bottom, and what we're doing is, in basically real time, rendering a 3D shaded bitmap of the ocean bottom. And this was a long time ago. So it was very, very cool, very exciting work.
That's interesting. Another friend of mine has a background in, actually worked on submarines as well, and now works in financial markets as a CTO. And everything has kind of a marine equivalent in terms of finding the market signal and then going towards that signal. In that context, it's about torpedoes and finding targets, but also, with the physics involved there too. And then the other side of this, which I thought of when you said Occam, I don't know if it's spelled the same way. I thought of Occam's razor, which is relates to the philosophical background. So what did you study in philosophy, and maybe anything? What do you take from that that maybe still informs you today?
Yeah, my main focus in my philosophy studies as a bachelor, it's not like bachelor's degree you go super deep, but it was in ethics, and so did quite a bit of reading. I think if nothing else, my philosophy degree prepared me to read dense materials and kind of stick with them and go deep, and then try and simplify that, and that's been probably a big part of my career, is like where I really focus on is trying to simplify, in this case, not so much technical, but some degree technical and ethical philosophy. But then, I think in AI ethics, there are a lot of interesting aspects of how AI should be deployed and how to train them. And so I think, some of my philosophy degree is help prepare me for that, to understand that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in the context of Arbital Health, I'm trying to think through what are ethical concerns with your use of AI that you've had to address, or how did you think through things like bias or just governance of AI in terms of decision making?
Yeah, there are a couple ways I would think of. One is we do use a lot of traditional machine learning techniques as well. So we have our tier predictive models that we're trying to predict things like high cost claimants, and with the goal of that is so that a provider can focus on them. And it's the reason they're a high cost claimant a lot of times is like they have a lot of serious issues, and helping get in front of that. That's great. It's great for the provider in the value-based care program, but it's great for the patient too. That like the patients who most need help are getting that help. So there's one aspect of like bias and ethics of really looking at our models to make sure they're not keying in on kind of the wrong things, and maybe directing providers to maybe not the patients that need the most focus. So that's something that we take very seriously, that providers are going to use this information, and so we need to make sure they're being enabled to take the best care of their patients. And then also another aspect of ethics is, regardless of who's paying us on the provider or the payer side, we want to be very transparent about how we do the calculations, how we compute the data, and then how we interpret it, and also how the AI interprets the data, so that whoever is looking at it, whether from the payer or the provider side, that we're being very fair about the interpretation of the contract.
So lineage, observability, all of this is cooked into the process or the stack.
Right. Yeah. Keeping track of like, where did that information come from? Where did that claims data come from? All the way down to like, what file was that piece of information in, and be able to track that to make sure that was actually part of the contract.
Going to go back a little bit. You mentioned machine learning, and I think for a lot of people with a short history and short attention span might think that Gen AI is AI. But if you've been in technology for a while, you understand that AI concepts theoretically go way back, and there's all kinds of applications of AI. So maybe if you could talk about a bit about the work you did at Castlight Health with prediction and around pricing transparency, and that application, and sort of where that was in the evolution of AI, just going back to that from today.
Sure. So when I joined Castlight Health in 2011, and so pretty early days at the company, had like two customers launch, but already then the engineering team was using machine learning in production. So this goes way back, and in some really interesting ways. So the main focus at that time around our use of machine learning was predicting prices. So this is around price transparency. This is before the No Surprises Act, transparency and coverage, all that, many, many years before that. And so what we're trying to do is help the employees and their families at large self-insured employers to understand what things cost before they went to the doctor. Seems like an obvious concept, but it's very difficult in the United States, and actually still is.
It certainly is.
Very difficult. And with all the complexity of the insurance plan. And so we were for one, trying to figure out what these costs were, because they're not public, and they're semi-public now, and then also your actual insurance plan can have some complicated provisions in it, and then there's the matter of where you are on your deductible, and is it the individual, is it the family, and so some of that is that's just pure algorithmic stuff, and getting data in real time of understanding where you are in your benefits, but there are there's no way we would be able to have enough claims data to just look up the price of what it had been before, and there are no real believable price lists at that point. So what we did is we used machine learning to basically reverse engineer the negotiated rates between the payers and the providers, and by taking real claims data. But again, there's so many types of procedures, many thousands of procedures, and many different medical groups that are negotiating independently with payers, and many different locations as well. Then there's a fair number of variables that go into what is the actual price before you even calculate the out-of-pocket price for the person. So we did some very cool work. One of my favorite algorithms was quintile regression for us. So instead of a classification problem, what we're trying to do is identify price ranges, at least a price range for imaging procedures. And so some very cool stuff then. And then continued to build that over the years. But then in late 2014, our business team realized that things were getting to the point where we had enough data that we could potentially build models to predict potential conditions of weight.
When you say have enough data,
so we probably at that point had about 1.5 billion claims, medical claims. So enough data on a large enough population to predict things like potential weight management issues in the future. And because they're issues on their own, but they also lead to other comorbidities like diabetes, increases the chances you might develop diabetes. But we also predicted that as well. And then people who might be considering elective knee surgery, knee replacement surgery or hip replacement surgery, and try and get in ahead of those in advance to in a lot of cases, what we're trying to do is let those employees know that maybe their employer offered a program for getting a second opinion, or there might be other potential alternatives to consider, like physical therapy, if they didn't have claims showing that they tried physical therapy yet. So we did in 2015 built out a system, and it feels like the kind of the early days of doing machine learning, at least in production for a system like this, and built that out, and very successful, and pretty transformative for the company.
Now, this was before a lot of the managed services that cloud providers offer now. So what was that building out that production system like? What was the stack, and how much duct tape and wire?
Yeah, there was a fair amount. And so yeah, MLOps was not a phrase that people used at the time, and because there was none, and there wasn't a lot of information about how do you do this at scale. And there definitely were tools. Vertex AI, Google Cloud did not exist, and Bedrock, those came much later. And there were some primitive, and not to be disparaging of it, it was early, and there weren't as many customers then, and they were figuring it out. But some tools that helped with managing experiments that you're doing, but not kind of the full on pipeline, and not APIs around it. And so we had to build all that ourselves. So we used built it all in Python, scikit-learn, XGBoost, things like that. Very traditional approach to building it. But we had to do a lot around monitoring the outputs, looking for data skew and prediction skew of is it is the underlying data, because this is something that you're doing, and the data is changing out from underneath you, and things happen, and the data sources that we're getting from the payers might be changing, and data quality issues might be coming in. So we had to build out a lot of tooling around that, and so that was a lot of manual work that I would not want to ever do again.
Yeah, and I guess if you were to do it now, just in terms of the time it would take to rebuild something like that, by a factor of, Would it be 100 times faster now, or just to get to production, to get that up and running, or is the complexity, there's still the same amount of complexity in I guess in building the algorithms?
Yeah, probably not 100 times. That would be nice, but at least several times, I would say. There was a lot of just building work that we had to do, that we would be able to use something just like the cloud providers or other service providers in the ML space offer. Even things like weights and biases and things like that would have made our life a lot easier if it were farther along at that time. But there's a lot of the data cleaning and like the understanding of the data that you're operating on, and of course then also other thing is like the discoveries you make before that, the diagnosis information, the diagnosis codes on the claims weren't quite as important to us. Just it didn't affect what we were doing in the application. But for this, building these models, the diagnosis codes on the claims were really key. And then we discovered there were data issues that there was not a reason to spend a lot of time on investigating. And so a lot of work had to go in that. A lot of back and forth with the data providers to get them to clean up that data. And so you do when you do start doing like very different, more advanced things with data, you discover that now your data quality needs often are much higher than they were before.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like if you have a very sophisticated jet fighter, you need a runway with no pebbles on it, as opposed to just landing a crop duster or something like that.
Right.
But that the data problems then, those still persist. I mean, that's not something that has been easily solved for, can be easily solved for, or no? Or
I would say not solved for, yeah. At least, yeah. Yeah, healthcare data, we talked earlier about like in my first job, like focus more on like telecommunications. And like an interesting thing about telecommunications, like the data quality is like it's a little more constrained and higher quality. Interoperability is really high. And it kind of has to be. Like if I'm on T-Mobile and I can only talk to people on T-Mobile, that would of course be terrible. And it would not take off as well. Healthcare interoperability is hugely important, but it's a major problem.
So where did that fail? Because the digitization of healthcare has been a topic, I don't know, 3 decades, and there's a lack of standardization. So why does that persist? I mean, that seems like something that, if it were a purely engineering problem, would have been solved for a long time ago.
Yeah, financial incentives, pseudo monopolies.
Yeah.
A lot of it's that sort of thing. Like money, a lot of times is what drives a lot of these things. But there's also, I would say, another thing. Not to focus entirely on that, is it's a highly distributed problem because there are so many individual physician groups, and they have their own electronic health record or EHR systems.
Right.
And there are a lot of EHR vendors, and it's fairly concentrated in the larger space, like the hospital health system space. But in the the smaller clinics and things like that, there's a long tail of EHR vendors. And there was the Meaningful Use Act made a big difference to incentivize and encourage the use of EHRs, but the way they actually get configured, and the semantics of what the data means in them can be interpreted differently, and so that's one aspect of it. And there's also on the incentive side, sometimes the health plans don't have the financial incentive or the motivation to share data, and you have to be very careful. I mean, this is incredibly sensitive data, and so they're obviously limiting it for good reason, limiting the distribution of that data. But a lot of these systems were built in the 70s, the 80s. There's like the jokes about like of things running on COBOL, like a lot of claims adjudication systems, at least from the older, more traditional payers. And there's also been a lot of roll-ups of those. They've combined them together. And so even within one of these health systems, there will be multiple claims adjudication systems, and you have to know which one actually processed that claim. So I think that's a lot of it, like the distribution of like the number of provider groups that are out there storing this data, and so there are kind of intermediaries like health information exchanges that solve some of this problem. A lot of nonprofits, not super well funded, but yeah, still a lot of work to go around interoperability.
Yeah, I think we could spend hours talking about that topic. So I'm going to shift gears a bit. Well, actually, there was one more question I wanted to ask, but I feel like it could go on, but we'll try and cap it at maybe 2 minutes. And I'm going to say this in a very general way, it may sound kind of naive, but we're hearing about advances in different foundation models, frontier models in terms of benchmarks and breaking different benchmarks, and that measurement of progress seems like it's very far away from things like GDP or just the cost of healthcare. So where would you draw that line if you were to trace advancements with, and it could be LLMs or just compute plus traditional AI? Is there a line that goes from those benchmarks to actual reduction of cost in healthcare, or is that a naive fantasy that bridge will be crossed, or is it more a human question of disentangling these and decoupling, these incentive structures that clearly add more friction, or at least are vectors kind of going in different directions?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Because there's a couple of ways you could imagine it being beneficial. One would be just a better experience, and so there are some technologies that are really taking off right now. One called ambient scribes, where in my last primary care provider visit, my provider was using one from NAPLA, and so for the first time, he was just engaging with me and not like heads down, focused on his keyboard, taking all of the notes. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and we've really hit this tipping point in the last year or two, where not only can it do the dictation, but actually extract codes and and identify, like what I was talking before about, like these diagnosis codes.
Yeah.
They don't have to so much look them up. The AI can do a lot of that, and so on one side, that this is one where it's really nice in that the experience for the patient is better. The experience for the provider is better. I don't imagine most providers love just having to type everything and spending so much time revising notes. Typically in the evening, as they call pajama time, when they revise all their notes. But also that could reduce admin burden on what, it's a different kind of coding, but it is this medical coding of putting in the appropriate codes,
right, and also remove the human in the loop there. That obviously adding a code to something shouldn't cause so much friction, and yet it does.
Right, and then as more information gets captured, because so if you then get referred to a specialist, the more information the referring provider can give to the specialist, probably the more efficient that specialist visit can be. And then specialists, that's where a lot of the cost of healthcare costs. It's more on the specialty side, not on the primary care side. So making those transitions smoother, I think that's a big opportunity in, and passing on information to the referrals, also getting it back as well. That's a big challenge too. Like they refer you off to a specialist and then don't hear back. So if we can use AI to facilitate that better, could make a big difference. And then as I was talking before about kind of like what Arbital does in the value-based care space, again, that there are a lot of complex ways to administer these contracts. And if we can use AI to disintermediate that, a lot of the manual effort spent on interpreting these contracts, I think that can actually have a pretty material impact on the cost of care in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we could spend a lot of time there. And so I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So you do hackathons. And I think for the audience, most people know what a hackathon is, but we could just broadly define it as, a group of engineers or product people, designers coming together and sort of jamming on different, problem solving, and generating, through that process, potential product ideas, potential solutions to problems. That's the spirit, and I think people understand it that way. I found that actually running a hackathon can be kind of complex. Like it sounds like a great idea, but then when you actually start figuring out, so who's the judge and what are the prizes, and there's some details in there that you have to be sensitive to get the engagement that you want to get out of it. If engagement is what you're looking for, sometimes what you're looking for is just new ideas that you could bake into your products. So I'd like to hear how you do that and how you run hackathons and any advice you have to people who want to do a hackathon.
Yeah. So when I was at Castlight, I led or co-led 27 hackathons.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of these.
That's why I'm asking.
I've done one at Arbital, and yeah, it's they were a lot of fun. Our focus at Castlight, a lot of it was on engagement of, and so one thing that a little bit different that I think that I did is I focused very much on inclusivity in the sense of like across all departments. Of like a lot of times hackathons will focus on engineers and products, and people will think, oh, to hack, I have to be able to code. No, of course, AI coding tools have lowered that barrier, and now it's a little easier for people to participate, but it can be intimidating. So I really tried to go out of my way to reach out to the legal team, the finance team. Like in our hackathons, I would say on average, about half or more than half of the participants were not from the traditional engineering or product. So we got great participation. And what's amazing there is, especially from customer support. So they
know all the pain points.
They know the pain points. They're talking to the customers. They know, what, and so they've got a lot of ideas and or maybe, not sure who to even ask or like how to pursue it. And they're very, very, our team was like very excited about pursuing it. And so they just went all in and it was really fantastic. And so I would definitely recommend that of like open kind of the aperture of like who you're kind of marketing to internally, encouraging them. And it does take some effort to like convince them that it's actually not that hard and and that you don't have to code that.
So do you pair them with like maybe someone from customer support with someone from, with a tester, with a DevOps person, so how do you configure those teams?
Yeah. So I didn't try to
or
like
they self-select.
They're actually were self-selected mostly, I did encourage engineers to reach out to people in other groups, and not just form a group of 5 engineers working on something to try and include someone from support. And it starts to take off after a while, and they realize, oh, that's the normal thing.
Right.
The other thing that like your question about like how do you reward and incentivize things, and so some of the so I would typically have a couple awards, and one of them would be it would require that the team have multiple. Well, you get more points for being for having more people from different departments, so there's actual incentive to have a broader team and not have this very concentrated team. And we did a lot of very cool stuff. We had swag helps a lot. T-shirts, of course, but I still have
It's funny how people respond.
Yes. Yeah. Even like, one thing that we did was donations. So we would allow the winning groups to choose a charity that they would like for the company to make a donation. We would make a fairly sizable donation on their behalf.
That's a great idea.
That was a really motivating aspect for a lot of the teams because they got to choose, and it's just a great thing. And so even that and gift cards and stuff, but I still even have things like I have this little Hack Day number 9 microfiber yoga towel that my cat uses as a laptop blanket. So that's all still around.
So 2 takeaways there. I mean, one is that, getting people from other areas of the organization that are not engineering, which I think is, maybe easier if the company's like a startup that's building a SaaS platform. That might be harder in a larger company where services are the offering or or manufacturing, or maybe not, but that's one takeaway. And I love that idea. I mean, I can imagine, people from sales coming in and having a lot of insight into what the market wants as well. So then that leads to, well, that's one takeaway. And then the other, incentivizing with things like a donation. I think that's a great idea. Swag is fun too. And it's funny how people will compete for the smallest things. It's like, I was just at a basketball game and they shoot T-shirts into the,
Yes.
That T-shirt is worth about $10. You wouldn't buy it on the street, but you want to win that. So one, I don't know if this is a problem with hackathons, but one phenomena that I've observed is that there's this temptation to want to solve actual problems in a more accelerated way, kind of like maybe a cynical take on this would be management says, hey, we've got all this stuff in the backlog and we can't deliver it, so let's do a hackathon on a weekend and tackle all these bugs, right? And do something like that. But oftentimes you want a hackathon so that you generate ideas that become part of the product eventually. So how do you kind of draw that line between, is it a hackathon or are we just getting more velocity for free?
Right. Really good point. It's so for the judging of it, there was a popular vote, but also and then I would weigh in, and so sometimes I put my thumb on the scale, and so things that came from the backlog, they got pushed down.
Okay.
It's great to do that, but that's not the point of a hackathon. It's just like kind of free work on backlog, and so that is a temptation that you have to actively, I think, work with teams on. And I was just like, also thinking, I just want to mention of sometimes around there can be events that can make a really big difference. When COVID happened and the shutdown happened, so that was, in early March, everybody's like, well, what do we do? And suddenly we're all remote. And our CEO reached out to me. It's like, we need to do a hackathon immediately, as soon as possible, and like this month. And okay, that's impossible, but like, let's do it. And we did. And so about 2 or 3 weeks later, after the main shutdown, we had a hackathon, and it was instead, like, of those 27, the most participants. So, and this is a company probably at the time 500 people or something like that. So we had it was about 150 people participated in the hackathon, actually actively worked on projects, and about 20 to 25 projects were worked on. 11 of those projects actually went in for production, because people that they wanted to build things. They wanted like you're frustrated at your home, and so it went on, so I'm not saying wait for the next pandemic to do a hackathon, but there are opportunities like that. So themes to centralize around. Sometimes we did it about reducing user friction. And so then we would emphasize and to give people some context, because sometimes I think people are also thinking like, what do I do? And it helps them.
No, it's too much of a blank slate could be kind of paralyzing too. Yeah.
And some amazing things came out of it. So we ended up later that year, we got connected to working on the back end for vaccines.gov. And so if you went to vaccines.gov and did a search, we were the search back end for that. And we built that in 6 weeks, in November and December. And it was amazing. And so this came out of the hackathon. So some of the early work was thinking about how to do these things, and also finding places to get a COVID vaccine. We built one of those. We had it in production very quickly. And we ended up tracking the actual COVID vaccines. So that was an incredible thing from home in December of like, it's real. I can see it. I can see these vaccines. It was amazing. And a lot of that came out of the results of what we did in that hackathon led to that. So you never know where some of these things are going to lead to and how they're going to transform your business.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Well, I hope that helps the audience. If anyone's thinking about doing a hackathon, that's some great advice. Question about talent. So we're in the Bay Area, and even though there's been this big fluctuation in the labor market, in the last couple of years, where there's all kinds of hiring, and then there are mass layoffs, and then hiring and mass layoffs in different areas. So how do you? Well, first, I'm just kind of curious. are your teams located mostly locally? Do you have distributed teams? And how do you compete for the best talent in an area where it goes without saying there's a lot of competition for talent?
Yeah. So the engineering team is pretty heavily focused on the West Coast. So the majority are there, and in particular in the Bay Area. So we have an office that we go to in San Francisco 2 days a week. And that's it's probably pretty close to half the engineering team that comes in very regularly for that. That is a really nice balance. Having the team be on the majority on the West Coast, that also helps as well. Just time zone makes it a little bit simpler. A lot of the work we do involves sensitive healthcare data, and there are a lot of regulations around, and just there are contracts that we have with other companies that, in some cases, prevent us from doing any of that work offshore. So that's why we focus a lot on the U.S. A lot of the actuaries in the rest of the company are a little more distributed, though. Competing is tough, and on just like an AI note, also the deluge of applications that you get. We open a position, and typically for each position, we'll get 250 to 300 applications a day. It's not unusual. We've had some positions that are like 1,000 applications in a single day. So that is one of the big challenges recruiting, is sorting through all that, or just, or do you just ignore, not do that and just focus on sourcing with a recruiter? For competition, because it is very difficult, especially as the Bay Area has taken off again, especially for AI focused businesses. Finding engineers that want to work in that space. Not to be cliched about it, but the mission-driven aspect, it really does matter. It matters, certainly matters for me. I mean, a lot of my coworkers you want to work on something that matters, and fixing the U.S. healthcare system, or like doing I think a significant part to transform how healthcare gets paid for, reduce the admin cost, like shift the expenditures to being about the patient as opposed to all the underlying systems. The opportunity to be part of that, I think that is a big advantage that we have.
No, absolutely, and especially since, and it's not just a matter of removing friction; it's really changing the model itself. I mean, the model going to the value-based care as a model. So most people are located here. You don't do any, or you have some actuaries that are distributed as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So when you do a hackathon, does everyone jump in from everywhere, or do you do it in like a local office?
Yeah. So we did it as part of our company offsite, the one we've done, and so that was especially for a first one. That it is remote hackathons it just adds an extra challenge. Not that I would say don't do it, but if you get that opportunity, and it's also a good way to start. It's just easier to explain in person, and I think it's easier for people to engage. It's more fun, like doing it in person, like get in a room or just in an area of the office or whatever space you have, and just allocate, even if you can do like at least to start with, like 2 to 3 hours. It's like a mini. That's what we did, like a kind of a mini hackathon as part of a company offsite. There's the huge amount of enthusiasm for it, and it's easier to kind of to keep it moving along and help people when they struggle, and also to help with matching up teams and getting people to work on and giving them like really quick feedback.
And this is beyond engineering too. So so that you really are face to face with people in customer support who have to deal with pain points every day. So that's exactly. It makes it a lot easier to get these people, people who maybe don't work together and might, maybe not feel as comfortable of like reaching out over just Slack or something, to work on a project. Like in person, it's a lot easier. So the last talent question I'll ask for now is, if you were to go just purely based on the news cycle, you'd think that no one hires junior engineers anymore, and that junior and mid-level those are agents that are writing all the code, and that senior level engineers are the ones who are 10x and reviewing everyone else's code. But I think the reality is more, obviously reality is more complex than that, especially in domains that are very complex, where there's a lot of institutional sort of tribal knowledge, that there's, I think, there's still the argument to invest in bringing up talent and junior talent particularly. So how do you balance that? And there's obviously this pressure that says, well, no, we can do so much more with AI, so we don't need to hire anymore. We're going to keep headcount flat. But people do eventually age out too, and you don't want to lose that knowledge over time. And that, I think, you still have to cultivate that. Again, depends upon the company, the domain, the problems you're solving. So how do you balance that? How do you look at that? And you have all these open positions. So are you looking at all levels? Are you looking only for people with a certain amount of depth?
Yeah, it's definitely a hard challenge, and it is something I worry about a lot. Kind of the hollowing out of that junior layer. That at first, a lot of the optimism about some of these tools is it levels up somebody with almost no experience to having they can get up to having kind of the equivalent of 2 to 3 years experience in much less than that, and I think that was very much the case. And the tools were less appealing for more senior engineers. They just weren't good enough. They'd spend so much time correcting the suggestions that there was no value. But that has changed, and now they are really powerful tools for senior engineers, and they in some cases can be even even more leverage because they will quickly know when it's wrong and they can guide it. They know they've been thinking through the questions that you would ask, like if you're pair coding with,
or if you're an actuary engineer.
Yeah. If you're pair coding with someone, like what are the things that you talk about? And well, now you just talk about those things with these tools, but you've had those conversations for years, and people right out of school, they to some degree, but not as much. It's we're currently not doing as much hiring as I would like to do at that more junior level. It's a tough trade-off when you have a complicated area that you're building tools in and building a platform in, and to also then try and bring somebody along from the beginning. I think as we get bigger, it will be easier for us to do that, and it's also, when you have fewer people to mentor, when you're a smaller organization, that can also be really tough. So hopefully we'll make that transition, as we have been scaling up the teams really significantly. That I'm hoping very soon we hit this inflection point where now you bring on a person and it's not like, oh, I just increased the size of the engineering group by 20%. Now it's 5% or less, and then it's easier to then integrate more junior engineers and bring in their experience.
Do you do mentoring in any formal way in your organization to bring people up, to upskill, or just to engage them more?
Yeah, we don't have a formal mentorship program, but there's I think our onboarding process is quite good, and it's very relatively structured from even much larger companies that I've been at, and also with the emphasis on pair coding and taking them through a lot of the basics of what we do. So it's not really a formal thing, but it organically, though, it actually it does happen.
Do you mentor people?
The managers that now I've scaled up the team to have a group of managers that work with me, and so I do my best to mentor them, and then also even just individual contributors. Of course, I do skip level one-on-ones with all the engineers in our group, and in those I try and focus those. This is always a challenge when you're growing from a small startup. One-on-ones start out often being very tasky getting stuff done. Now we're big enough now. The engineering org is around 20 people now. To now shift to thinking more about career development and any way that I can help them, as opposed to being more project management.
Do you have a mentor that you were the mentee that made a mark on you, helped you with your career, that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I had a mentor at my last company, and I had worked with him 2 companies before when I was straight out of grad school. And he was a fantastic person and had really broad experience in not just engineering, but in finance. And He was, wanted to get involved in all aspects of the company, and it did early on created that interest on my side of like not just be focused on my engineering work, but try to understand marketing, try to understand finance, talk to the people, spend a lot of time with them, and he was just he is and is like a great manager, and I just learned from him. I was like very lucky to be an individual contributor on his team for a few years. Very empathetic, very focused on like on very productive one-on-ones, not being like also in learning more personally about individuals and getting to know people's motivations and incentives, like spending a lot of time on that of understanding what someone actually wants to do. It was like it kind of connected that experience with this person, Richard. But then also almost like not quite a mentor, but there's a book, Things That Make Us Smart, that had a big impact on me, by Donald Norman. I think it can be an intuition maybe that like everyone else, it likes what you like, and like everyone else, like, I think this work is really cool. So I think everyone on my team will think this is cool. And in particular, like what the book is about is like how we learn and through practice, tuning, like getting really good at something. Some people, that's the way they like to learn, and they're very comfortable in that. Other people like just want to suck things up like a sponge, and they want things to be different every single day. Those are very different learning styles. And the insight for me in that, in reading that, was that I need to understand how people want to learn, what kind of work do they want to do. I shouldn't just assume that because I think it's really cool to do to be learning something new every single day is that makes somebody else comfortable. And so just like observing him interacting with other team members and me as well. Just, that learning from experience is just incredibly valuable. Got to learn a lot from reading books, but firsthand having a mentor do that is, changed my career.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So I've had a couple mentors that have made a similar impact, thinking about sort of an organization being, and people, I've said this before, organizations can be like an operating system, meaning that everything you do is intentional. And that, everything from interviewing people to being more structured, to one-on-ones being structured, to having, meeting cadence, and not determined by routine or by comfort level, but by true necessity. And there was a particular COO that had a big impact on me, kind of shaking me out of just having the technologist view of the world, and sort of seeing organizations as being almost like an organism, but really understanding individual motivation. And one thing that I always say that that my very first job out of college, my boss said to me once. He said, people all come to work for different reasons. Don't assume they all come to work for the same reason. And understanding what that reason is incredibly important. And then having a mission that I can see how that can attract a certain kind of talent as well. Just thinking about what you're saying about how you find people that will then really commit themselves to building something interesting. So this has been wonderful discussion. Really appreciate it. Any other thoughts you'd like to share just before we wrap up?
It's really fantastic. Wonderful questions. Great to spend some more time with you. I think that one thing to maybe wrap up with is that always be open to potential opportunities, and be looking for companies that where there is this potential mission that can really change, especially when you're at a startup. It is tough, as quote I remember from Ben Horowitz's "The Hard Thing About Hard Things." I
was thinking about that.
You wake up and eat glass every day. That is there's a lot of romanticism about life at startups, but it can be grueling work, and it can be pretty mentally tough, and so that having that focus and understanding of like why you're doing what you're doing, that it's not just about like financial incentives, because you never know how those things are going to work out. You want to be in a role where what you're doing matters, the people that you're with, you're like, and stuff like that. And then you get the added bonus of it's actually like a promising idea that can really take off. And so those are out there. And I was lucky that this role found me.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're in a sector that there's big problem to solve there, that's that's I think yeah, couldn't be in a better spot.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks very much, Lucas.
This was it for this episode. Join us next time for more real-world conversations between technology leaders. And if you like what you heard, subscribe to CTO2CTO. See you soon.